I don't know that anybody's going to top Tim with the South Carolina one. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, let's talk about your book first, because I've mentioned to you before how much my wife and my daughter now and everybody in the family.
I'm glad the
enjoys
Erickson
this.
family loved it so much. It would help the Cotton family if each one of those members would buy their own
Yes.
copy.
Yeah, well, we'll see about Christmas presents this year. But I'm trying to sell it to the room. Again, Duty 33777. You'll get a link.
I'm glad you can remember that better than the former vice president did his own text link the other night at the debates. That's an important one, though.
Yeah.
Text that so you can get the Amazon link to Sacred Duty.
Well, all right, Siri, stop. Why did you write the book?
I wrote the book because I wanted to tell the story of the Old Guard of Arlington. The Old Guard is where I served between my tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. There have been some good books about Arlington itself, the cemetery and its history, but no one had really told the story of the Old Guard, which is literally the Old Guard, the oldest infantry regiment in our country. It goes back to 1784, fought in every major conflict up to World War II, but in the last 72 years has performed one of the most sensitive and critical jobs any nation has, which is honoring our fallen heroes at Arlington National Cemetery. So the story is really the book is the story of the Old Guard. It's not my story. Most politicians write a book, about themselves and how they were built in a log cabin that they built with their own two hands. But this tells the story of the young men and women who serve at Arlington today that guard the tomb of the unknown soldier and perform military honor funerals and conduct ceremonies to honor the nation and our military and our warriors.
Well, again, tremendous book. And one of the things that fascinates me in the book is you chronicle really the generational shift within the Old Guard and now bringing women in the Old Guard, and how it's almost a reflection of the generational shifts and changes within the military as a whole.
Mm-hmm. The Old Guard, like any infantry regiment, has now integrated women. The Old Guard has had women for several decades because as an infantry regiment it's had support roles that have had women in it. But one of the most recent female tomb guards, the fourth female soldier to earn her tomb badge, she left about 3 or 4 years ago, but her legacy continued forward. I spent dozens of hours at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and underneath the amphitheater in their quarters, learning about how they guard the tomb, since I didn't do that personally. And several of the senior guards there were new recruits at the tomb 4 or 5 years ago, and she was their mentor, Sergeant Ruth Hanks. So it does reflect some of the changing roles in our military, which is also obviously reflecting changing roles in our society.
One of the things that has always fascinated me about those who guard the tomb, or even when the weather just gets out, you got a hurricane coming through, and they refuse to give up their post.
Yeah, so the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier has been guarded every minute of every day since July 2nd, 1937. The Old Guard has done that since April 6th, 1948. And there's always been a soldier present on the plaza to guard that tomb. As you say, no matter what the weather, even in hurricanes or in blizzards. It's sensitive information, how they conduct that, especially in off hours, since that is a military installation, but it's not behind any kind of fence or protective barrier. So they keep those details close, but I can tell you, having been there on many nights, there's always a soldier present on duty, which is really simply a reflection of the love that we show for those 3 unknown soldiers, which have come to mean more than just representing the several thousand unknowns from World War I, World War II, and the Korean War, but really every American who has given his or her life in defense of our nation, from Lexington, Concord, down to Afghanistan just this week.
Thank you for writing it. I want to shift a little bit into public policy, and I know one of the issues that has gotten a lot of your attention since you've been in the Senate is the immigration issue and what's happening at the border, and the number of people who, I remember the government shutdown. In fact, the very first call I ever had from President Trump, I was trying to put my Christmas tree in a storage unit, and he calls, and when the lady on the phone says, "Please hold for the president," you drop the Christmas tree. And he was calling to thank me for having written that, there's a crisis at the border, the president's right, we got to do something, at a time when the media and the Democrats were all saying there is no crisis, it's manufactured. Now suddenly the talking point of the day is, oh my gosh, there's a crisis, but it's President Trump's fault. How do you navigate this situation?
Well, immigration is a very important issue. It touches on questions of prosperity and security and community. even before I got into the Senate, Eric, my early days in the House were defined in 2013 by the so-called Gang of Eight bill, which passed the Senate. Large bipartisan vote. Sometimes large bipartisan votes mean you better watch your wallet. But fortunately, I and a few others were able to stop it and then ultimately kill it in the House of Representatives. It was a terrible bill, giving amnesty to illegal immigrants without securing our border in advance, and had more mass migration that would hurt working class Americans. Actually, that's, I think, one of the most important accomplishments I've had in my time in the Congress. You know, it's Calvin Coolidge that said it's just as important to stop bad bills as it is to pass good
My
bills.
favorite president, yeah.
A very underrated president
Yeah.
as well. So the president obviously has a very different kind of approach to immigration than a lot of normal Republicans, traditional Republicans who had run for president. In fact, he and I first got to know each other in the summer of 2015 talking about immigration and about Iran at the time, two issues on which we see eye to eye and did at the time. And he's been very focused on trying to get the border secure and enforce our immigration laws to send the signal that if you want to come to the country, you need to do it the right way. You need to get in line and you need to go through our immigration system, while trying to reform that system as well to reflect the priorities of our modern economy. What's happened at our southern border is a genuine crisis. It's a different kind of illegal immigration than most people perceive or that we faced for 30 or 40 years. Traditionally, illegal immigration has been young, single men coming to this country to try to get a job, send money back home. Today, it's primarily people coming, saying they're families, oftentimes not families, trafficking in young children to try to get across the board, because the combination of some well-intentioned but poorly written laws addressing humanitarian challenges around the world, in addition to bad court decisions, have created a situation now where if you show up at the border with a child, it's almost ollie oxen free. You know, they almost just wave you straight through. That's why we've seen over 100,000 persons a year or a month crossing the border for several months now. These would be relatively easy changes to the law, but as the president says, the Democrats simply don't want to change the law. So he's doing what he can, and right now making some real progress, working with Mexico, working with Guatemala, sometimes with some hard-nosed diplomacy, to try to get those countries to enforce their own borders so migrants from their south can't get all the way to our border, and Mexico in particular deploy more of its forces to both of its borders to try to stop the illegal migrant flows that we've seen over the last 6 to 12 months or so. There has been a decline in recent months. Some of that is seasonal, always declines in the summer on our border because of conditions there. But I hope these policies, as they mature over the next several months, will see a continued decline, and that ultimately the Democrats will come to their senses and fix what is plainly a misguided system at the border.
Well, you've got even the New York Times editorial board saying that there is a crisis, the president needs the money to do something. It's shocking to me that when you have the liberals in the New York Times editorial board saying there's a crisis, give the president what he needs to deal with it, and the Democrats have become, I guess they want the issue for the campaign trail.
Well, I don't think that's going to work out very well for them. It didn't work out very well for them in 2016 when Hillary Clinton said that she would essentially stop deportations in this country. Her policy in 2016 was, unless you committed a serious and probably a violent felony, you would not be deported, no matter whether you had been here for 30 years or been here for 30 minutes. I thought that was pretty extreme. The Democrats now have found a way to make it even more extreme. Almost every Democrat running for president wants to decriminalize crossing our border illegally. I mean, that is the definition of an open borders policy. Yet they want to take it a step further and say, oh, and by the way, if you cross the border illegally, not only will we not deport you, we'll give you taxpayer-funded health care as well.
Right.
And also, let me just refute the concept that this is somehow the humanitarian proposal or it's the moral thing to do. Look, I wish our fellow man well, and I pray for all mankind. But I serve the people of America, and my job is to represent their interests and to serve them. This side of heaven, we're not going to redeem mankind, and we're certainly not going to do it through the United States government. But the Democrats would draw very arbitrary distinctions and say that if you're Mexican or Guatemalan or El Salvadoran or Honduran and you show up at our border, you get in. Or for that matter, if you're wealthy enough from the Congo, when you have the ability to fly to South America and get up here, we're going to let you in. But you know, there's literally billions of people around the world whose life would be improved substantially by coming to the United States, but they don't live on the same landmass, so they can't get here on foot. That's the only distinction between some of the migrants showing up on our border and, say, the Bangladeshis that would benefit by coming here. That's not a moral distinction. It's a totally arbitrary distinction. It's not one that we should draw.
You mentioned Iran and seeing eye to eye with the president on this. It seems like we have increasing tensions now in the Persian Gulf. I grew up in Dubai, very familiar with the Iranian saber rattling and blowing up oil platforms during the Persian Gulf War. And I'm wondering what our response needs to be right now with the increasing tensions in the Persian Gulf.
Well, I've already said that Iran's conduct would warrant retaliatory military strikes to teach them a lesson and impose some paying costs for what they're doing. First, to our aircraft, even though unmanned, or to shipping on the high seas in the Gulf of Oman, the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. The president, for understandable reasons, is practicing forbearance right now the same way Ronald Reagan did between 1984 and 1987. But I think that period of time is an object lesson now. That forbearance that Ronald Reagan practiced did not stop Iran. They continued to escalate until ultimately they hit a U.S. Navy vessel. And then Ronald Reagan sunk about half of their Navy. Iran is lashing out like this for the same reason they were in the 1980s, because their back is against the wall. A little over a year ago, we withdrew from the nuclear deal. We reimposed sanctions. Those sanctions have gotten tougher every single month. And about 2 months ago, we really put them in the hurt locker by eliminating the waivers that we were giving them to export oil, primarily to our allies, countries like India or Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and did so, by the way, without any significant increase in the price of oil. So to just give you a sense of scale, Iran was exporting about 2.8 or 2.9 million barrels of oil a day before we withdrew from the deal last year. Now they're down to barely 100,000 barrels of oil per month, just to give you a sense of how badly this is hurting them. So every day that the status quo remains for Iran is a very bad day, and it creates more and more pressure on the Ayatollahs in Tehran. So that's why I think you see them lashing out and step by step trying to increase the tensions, attacking oil tankers in a port, attacking them at sea, attacking an American drone, seizing a British ship. I worry that they're going to continue to escalate until an American is harmed. Now, the president has been clear while he practiced forbearance a couple months ago when they shot down one of our drones, that if an American is harmed by Iran, I think the term he used was obliteration.
Works for me. So in that regard, there's a debate within the administration right now on whether or not to allow Iran to continue civil nuclear development. What's your position on that?
So I wrote a letter with a couple other senators that said that we shouldn't continue those waivers. We rescinded two of the seven, back in May. The president just announced yesterday that he was going to extend them. Those aren't the centerpiece of our Iran policy. I wouldn't have extended them. I think one reason he is, though, is through the diplomatic efforts to bring countries like Great Britain or France on board, recognizing that Iran is ratcheting up pressure not just on the United States, but also on those nations. As I said, having seized that British ship, they should recognize that they are not going to be held harmless by Iran. It's going to use every available tool it has to try to slip out of these sanctions, to try to get back on its feet, and try to outlive the Trump administration. Again, I would have revoked those, or I wouldn't have granted those waivers this time around. We can always review them in another 90 days. The president had a similarly deliberate approach to the nuclear deal with Iran. I would have torn it up on the first day, as he said in the campaign trail that he was going to do. It took him a little over a year, but he got to the right spot, and in some ways got there with stronger public opinion and also stronger supports in the region as well, if not from our European allies.
Now, I hesitate to ask you this question, but we actually had a debate last night as to whether or not you were the person who submitted this question, because it's Tom from Little Rock who submitted the question. But the question was essentially that you're on the news so much talking about these issues every day. It's what you've been known for, and asked, would I please give you the opportunity to talk about Arkansas and the public policy issues that affect voters in Arkansas right now. I know we've got a couple people from Arkansas, including Tom from Arkansas. particularly the issues of free enterprise and how the budget deficit is affecting states right now. And also, he noted that in Arkansas, the issue with health care, obviously, is one that every state is dealing with. What can you in the Senate do in those regards? But I get the gist that basically he's an Arkansas voter who wants to let you shine on Arkansas.
Well, first off, I'd say, and I hear a lot from Arkansans, that they do care very much about what we do to rebuild our military and care for our veterans and to defend our nation abroad.
Okay, let me stop you right there. So it's Arkansans for people who live in Arkansas. I never actually knew that.
Arkansans.
Okay.
That's the correct way to pronounce it, yes. Not Arkansasiers.
Yeah.
But you know, there's a lot of issues that affect us in Arkansas. They're not just exclusive to Arkansas, but they do affect our region, like what Georgia faces here, what some of the Midwest faces. You know, you look at the tariffs that the president has imposed, might impose more on China. It's tough times in farm country right now. That's not just because of the tariffs. You know, we've had a very wet spring. Planting was delayed. We had some flooding, severe flooding a couple months ago. So it's probably not going to get better this planting season and this coming harvest. But they also know that, you know, China has been mistreating us in Arkansas. You know, like Georgia, we irrigate crops, unlike the Midwest. So and the main crop is rice that we produce. That's always been discriminated against by East Asian countries. So the loss that we see is somewhat aspirational, trying to open new markets as opposed to losing markets. Now, we do have other export markets like soybeans, which is also a big commodity for us, or cotton, obviously poultry and pork with Tyson. We'd like to see those markets open. I think most farmers, most ranchers in Arkansas know that the president is working to get a better trade deal with China. He's not trying to impose tariffs as a policy in perpetuity, but to use that leverage to get a better trade deal. And then you talk about small business and the free enterprise system. We have some giant companies in Arkansas, like Walmart or Tyson, and they provide a lot of good, high-paying jobs, provide a lot of opportunities for advancement. But it's still true that the majority of new jobs created in Arkansas, especially in an economy like this, come from small businesses. So one thing of which I'm most pleased that we've done in this Congress over the last 2.5 years with this administration is to try to get more sensible regulations and get government off the backs of Arkansans and by their sides to help them live their lives and build a business or get a job. You know, that started with the Congress. We repealed something like 18 Obama-era regulations. That's continued now. You know, the president promised in his campaign that he would repeal 2 regulations for every new 1 regulation. The number is actually more like 13 to 1. And then finally, you know, we face some challenges in Arkansas that I'm sure you have here in Georgia and around the country as well when it comes to crime and the drug epidemic. And I've worked very hard with our law enforcement in Arkansas and their representatives in Washington as well to make sure that we don't forfeit the very hard-won gains of the 1990s when new policing tactics and new sentencing laws came in to try to turn the country around. Had remarkable successes in some cities like New York, Little Rock as well. But we've seen trends go in the opposite direction as well. So you know, I'll be speaking to our Sheriff's Association on Monday about some of these things. But it's something that I worry very much about, that we may be seeing an increase in crime along with the increase in drug use over the last 10 years. Coming down a little bit, but still has a very long way to go. Just a few of the things that I hear about a lot when I'm in Arkansas.
You mentioned tariffs, and the Federal Reserve cut rates the other day. There seems to be some concern about the economy long term, particularly with what's happening in China and elsewhere, possibly because of tariffs. I believe in free markets and free trade. I do think you have to give the president some credit that he's caused a number of countries that have had unfair trade practices to buckle some on the tariffs. But I wonder long term with what happened with the stock market the other day when the president wanted to increase tariffs, where do we go in this trade fight we're having with other nations?
So the first, I would say the president does deserve a lot of credit for bringing Republican opinion, especially elite Republican opinion in Washington around on China in particular, to where my opinion has always been, to where his opinion has always been. China is different. China is the largest country in the world. It has the second largest economy in the world. It now probably has the second most capable military in the world, a military that has been designed in the last 30 years to prevent the United States from protecting our interests and our allies in East Asia. China is different. So one thing that I hope we see in the coming months is more successes like he had with Korea, the pending success we may have with Mexico and Canada, similar progress with the EU, and after Brexit with the United Kingdom, in trying to get better trade deals with countries who are our allies, or at least not rivals to our power in the world, and get them on our side in trying to force China to change its ways, change its trade and economic and financial practices, its diplomatic and political practices, and its military practices. But China is different. I think you'd have widespread agreement in the Congress now that China is different from all those nations. Chuck Schumer always runs around and says, I'm tougher on China than you are. I've been tougher on China than anyone in Congress. I say, Chuck, that's only because you've been here longer than I've been alive. But to his credit, though, he is tougher on China than a lot of Republicans have been.
Well, yeah, that is one of the things that I've had to educate myself on being someone who is skeptical of tariffs. The amount of things that China gets away with, including being a developing nation for the World Trade Organization as opposed to a developed nation, allows them to get away with things, and I have a hard time thinking of them at this point as a developing nation.
Yeah, one of the worst decisions I think made in Washington over the last 20 years, and it was very much a bipartisan decision by both parties in Congress, by the Clinton administration and the Bush administration, was first granting China most favored nation status. They had to change its name to permanent normal trade relations to get it through Congress at first. And then second, admitting them to the World Trade Organization. I remember being a kid in college, not all that engaged in politics or certainly international relations, but very much opposed to that because of the way China treated its own people, especially the way it persecuted religious minorities, be them many of the private Christian churches in the eastern part of China or the Uyghur Muslim population in the western part of China. But the prediction at the time was, well, we're going to let China in. We're going to give them most favored nation status, we'll let them into the WTO, and then they will inevitably change their ways. With economic liberalization will become legal reform, judicial reform, ultimately political reform as well, and China, before you know it, will be Denmark. That obviously hasn't happened. Now, if you want to be a little less critical to the people that made that mistake, you could say, well, it was an experiment, not a mistake. And the mistake came within a few years, certainly after the financial crisis in 2008, not to realize the experiment had failed and begin to reverse it. And that's what the president has been trying to do over the last 2.5 years. It's badly overdue, but we're making some progress in it.
Last question for you. I have only accidentally been in Arkansas, and only accidentally because I was in Memphis visiting my family and took the wrong turn on the interstate and
I thought you were going to
wound up in Arkansas.
I thought you were going to say you came to Little Rock to visit the Clinton Library.
I've not been there yet. Maybe I should go. But why should I go to Arkansas?
Arkansas is a beautiful state. It's called the natural state for a reason. It has some of the most geographically diverse territory in our country. East Arkansas is farm country. South Arkansas, beautiful piney woods.
Northern Louisiana.
The Ouachitas in kind of the southwest, west central part of the state, one of the only east-west mountain ranges in the country. That may not seem like much, but it's beautiful for camping, hiking, four-wheeling, if you like to ride motorcycles, because you're riding into the sunset every day or you're riding into the sunrise. So it's got great tourism. And of course, northwest Arkansas is not just beautiful Ozark Mountains, but one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country with Walmart and J.B. Hunt and Tyson, University of Arkansas, and all of the hundreds of companies that those giant companies have helped create to work with them as vendors or suppliers or what have you. It's got a great people as well. I love it, and you should come too.
Well, now that you mentioned mountains and motorcycles, I'm sure my wife will ride her Harley over there. So, Senator Tom Cotton, thank you very much for stopping by. I appreciate it very much.